Welcome to the Travel Plus Loyalty podcast, the show that meets people from the travel industry and those who travel and talk about travel and loyalty. We also provide useful tips and information you can use in your travel life. Your host today is Henrik Olsen. In this podcast, we are going to talk to Allan Hoffery from Singapore Airlines. We are meeting him at his last day as sales manager for the Nordic. A meeting that takes place in Copenhagen Airport, where he is saying goodbye to SQ351 to Singapore, the last time after 30 years working for Singapore Airlines. Let's take a trip to Copenhagen Airport and meet Allan Hoffery at the gate. Sitting in Copenhagen Airport in the terminal, in the departure gate on Singapore Airlines, and we are visiting Allan Hoffery from Singapore Airlines. And Allan, we are here at a very special reasons today. This is your last departure from Copenhagen to Singapore. How are you describing this today?
Well, it's quite strange, yes. After 30 years, I will be sending off SQ351 for the last time. I'm normally not out here, but I thought it is a unique opportunity for me just to put a final end to my 30 years with Singapore Airlines here in the Nordics. So. Looking back, when we are looking back, so we are sending off a brand new Airbus 350, and when I joined 30 years ago, we were operating Boeing 747. At that time, it was what was considered the flagship of the aviation, and it was quite unique at the time. And I remember that we had one stop on the way for two of the flights. We were operating 3 flights at the time, and 2 on the other one. We were going to a place fairly unknown to a lot of people at the time called Dubai. Later on, it actually materialized quite a lot. But 30 years back, it was more like a shipping hub more than a tourist destination like it is today. But it was quite unique. It was quite different. When I'm looking back and how it was, I can say we had one computer in the office for typing letters and doing our normal stuff. So the technology was slightly different from what we are used to today. It was very innovative. Singapore was far away, and we were primarily looking at Far East Asia, and we were looking at Australia. We were quite known to be the carrier at the time to Australia, and our prime business at the time was business going to and from. We were also an airline which was quite innovative at the time. We still are, but and I'm still saying yes, it's my last day, so I can still say so. But we had 24 seats in first class, and we were one of the first one really to introduce something which was quite unique. We called it at the time Raffles class, and that was in line with what a lot of other airlines were looking at the time. It was business class. Singapore Airlines has always had a great focus on business traffic and business traveler, and the introduction of Raffles class was really quite unique and quite big here. We celebrated it quite heavily for a long time, and tried to establish the brand as Raffles class. Later on, it was, because it was difficult for people to understand what is this and what is that, it was then changed into to business class, but with a small add-on, more than business as usual. So looking back on all that, it was quite exciting to have the first non-stop flight, which was actually not a non-stop flight as such, but it was a non-stop flight out of Copenhagen. We were operating London, Copenhagen, Singapore, and the leg from London to Singapore was, of course, with a stop here, and then we had a non-stop out of Copenhagen. So you must say today it's quite different. Now when the flight is going away today. It will be 11 hours, 30 minutes. It is non-stop. The corporate business needs non-stop flights. So of course it was delightful when we had the first Airbus 340 coming into Copenhagen, where we are able to do it, and operating first 3 flights and 4 flights. Unfortunately, we were then cut because the airline as such needed 1 extra flight, so we were cut 1. We were back to 3. Then we were moving on with everything there, and the first talks were actually on a managerial level with our friends SAS, and we were talking about why not operating a joint venture. At the time it was a co-chair first, and then later on a joint venture. SAS was operating a 340, and we were operating flights here. SAS was operating via Bangkok, because the distance on the 340 was just on the edge, going non-stop from Singapore. Either you had to have less passenger or less cargo. So it was actually one of those things where convenience prevailed. So our 2 CEOs actually got together and agreed that we should explore the possibilities. And that was really when things, at least for Singapore Airlines and the Nordics, took up in speed, and we were then for almost a year commuting between Stockholm and Copenhagen and Singapore, having meetings, finding out how it should all be, how do you implement, how do you do. And the great thing in the aviation industry, and in particular being in the Nordics, is that everybody knows everybody. So the people who were at that time responsible for SAS in Asia was people who we have worked with previously. So the whole integration and the whole, let's say, the way to integrate all the airlines was, or the 2 airlines was pretty smooth. And then we got back to 5 aircrafts, looking to get into daily, and the daily became possible when we were getting the 777-300, which for the first time, again after a long time, introduced a first class out of Copenhagen. Everybody was thinking that we were not really able to fill up a first class, but I must say that we had a very, very high load factor in both the business class and the first class, and at that time the premium economy, because that was another thing that was introduced with the type of aircraft. So it was quite exciting times. We must say that things were really picking up at the time. We knew that we wanted to go to Stockholm. We also knew that we were lacking of possibilities in regards to number of aircrafts, because they were still slightly short of delivering some of the aircrafts. So we were able to go online in Stockholm as well with a brand new Airbus 350 via Moscow.
So you extended the Moscow route? We
extended the Moscow route. It was previously the Moscow route was going via Manchester to Houston, which was an option we were also looking at, but for various reasons, unfortunately, it didn't come about. But then the Moscow flight was extended to Stockholm, and we were able to do 5 times a week, where we were transiting in Moscow. A lot of people who were having a bit of a resistance to going via Moscow, but I must say that I was extremely pleasantly surprised when I went via Moscow. It is, of course, different, but I must say that the kindness and the way that you were treated as a transit passenger, the rules and regulation in Moscow is like this, that you have to deboard the aircraft. But it actually is not a problem, or was not a problem. What can you say? All of a sudden, the possibility to go daily out of Copenhagen was last year in the autumn. We introduced it, and all of a sudden we were hearing about this strange sickness that came out of China. Nobody really at the time took very serious. It must be a Chinese thing. But little by little we could see that it actually started to impact, and beginning of this year, we saw the final changes into it. We've all of a sudden called in to watch television and got our news out of the television. We had to take all the passengers back from wherever they were, and it was a huge job to coordinate all of that. And I think we had some of the more hectic times in all of our lives, getting people back. People not really taking it all of that seriously when we called them and say, listen, you don't have that many options. Either you go on the flight tomorrow, or you will have to wait a long time, and we don't know whether the borders are going to close. Then, yes, COVID got our job to become quite different. We started to look at what now, no flights, and all of a sudden we got information that we were going to have the 2 flights coming in, and we were all looking at each other and said, okay, what are they going to do? But that was medical supplies. People remembering the first time of the COVID, we were actually caught a bit short-handed of a lot of medical supplies, and we were able to bring in on a daily basis at one time, but then several times a week, charter flights with medical equipment. We were one of the first one really to bring it in, and had the first flights. And then we were trying to find out what can we take the other way, which was foodstuff, it was spare parts. Even though the world was closing down, there was still an urgent need for ship spares or machinery spares. So all of a sudden in the month of March, we were starting to have all new flights, all cargo, and then we were starting to prepare for a recovery. The things were starting to look pretty positive, and then all of a sudden it was just like, oh, this is going to take a long time. So we were starting to work on the plans for a recovery. And at that time, being my age and also being a long time with the company, I felt that it was also time for the young people maybe to step up. So when we had to make sacrifices by shortening the staff strength, I volunteered to say that if that was needed, then I would take a redundancy package and at that time. And basically that's the reason why we're sitting now here at the airport and sending off the aircraft.
So 30 years.
Yeah.
Wow. And 30 years explained in 10 minutes time. It's a long one. And I think it's very positive that you take one from the team and volunteered for redundancy packages and giving the situation that we see, that we also, as you mentioned, are going to see this happening for many months to come, and it will have an impact on the airline industry. But if you rewind a little bit to the beginning, how did it all start, Allan?
Well, basically, I started out in forwarding. I was working in air freight forwarding here at Copenhagen Airport, and I always thought it could be fun to challenge oneself. So at that time, I started to work with the airlines differently. I was doing charters. I was doing charters into Africa, and primarily where I really got the big kick was to arrange for charters of a very famous Danish toy manufacturing situated in Billund. I was sending Lego building bricks to the United States by charters because, as normal, the demand in the US can be very big. So that way I actually started to get the interest in the aviation. I was then traveling around as a forwarding agent, and I wanted to be more involved in the airline business, and was looking to see what is there. And I found on a sales mission to Australia, I actually looked at an ad for another airline called Saudi Arabian Airlines, and I thought that could be quite fun to apply there. Because they were restarting in the Nordics by opening an office in Copenhagen. And it took a long time. Basically, they were looking at all the options, and apparently I was the last one. So, but I was able to get that job, and I was there almost 10 years in the times where Saudi Arabia really was very fun to work with. There was a lot of things to do. It was an airline that expanded rapidly, and there was a lot of things in the cargo, so I could take my cargo experience as well, and then of course move it into the passenger thing. Then I wanted to join another airline, and I wanted to be one who at the time was online here in Copenhagen. So I applied for Singapore Airlines. Regrettable, I didn't get the first time, but then I said, okay, after 2 years, I tried again, and then I was lucky enough to get in. And then my time with Singapore Airlines started on a hot summer day, as we say, by moving from Vesterfejmarksgade to Nyopsgade. So the distance was not too far.
No, not too far. And actually, Singapore Airlines, when you started 30 years ago, Singapore Airlines has been running out of the Nordics or Copenhagen for several years. So it's an old company, an old route that you're actually taking over. But what have you been doing? Because if you need to have some touch points over the 30 years of Singapore Airlines, so we know there are some specific things that have been interesting you in impacting the business, like using local produce on the flights and aircraft types and so forth. Like it mentioned earlier, the first class out of Copenhagen, which was unique. We don't have that. We don't have that anymore. But you brought that in as one of the first one. So if you have some 5 things that you would touch on out of the many things that you've been talking about, what would be the highlights?
I think the highlight basically was that we were able to get sustainability into it. We had a project called From Farm to Plane. And it sounds very nice. And basically, when you're at the head office, it is something that the head office is working on. But we actually took it one step further. We were trying to see whether we can find Danish companies who are producing in Denmark, who are very sustainable, and to see whether we could get that on board the aircraft. And we were quite lucky in order to get Skarø Ice as one of the first one that we were able to get on board. Then we thought it could be going one step further. So we basically wanted to have a competition between some of the best chefs in Denmark to produce local Danish food for consumption between Copenhagen and Singapore. So we had the first ever chef competition made by Gate Gourmet and ourselves, where we invited all the top chefs in Denmark to participate in creating a dish for us, for our business class and for our economy at the time. And that was basically a very big challenge, and it was exciting to work with, because one thing is that you can do food in a restaurant. Second thing is that get that restaurant feeling up into the air and get all the same tastes out of the meal. So we had to rework what we call the food manual. So together with our marketing company and our PR company, we actually created sort of a book on how to make food for airlines who wanted to take it into the air. And that was a very big thing, and to get it up and running. And then since we did that, when we also introduced Kokkeriet on board, it has been one of those things to take local Danish brands and put them on board the aircraft, so that whenever the Nordic passenger was traveling on this, the flight out of Copenhagen, they could feel that there's still a touch of Nordic, plus the fact that all the ones returning back to Singapore or otherwise in our network actually could see that the Nordic cuisine is a lot more important than it used to be. It was just considered, average. But we have some of the greatest restaurants in the Nordics, and the idea was to move on to have some Norwegian and some Swedish chefs to do exactly the same, and be able to do that and getting the permission to do that. In the beginning, we didn't get all the permissions, but eventually we got the permissions to do it. I think this is something that I would like to continue if I would have stayed on. Also on sustainability, which I think is one of the really big things that all the airlines will have to focus a lot more on.
Yeah, because there is definitely a lot of waste.
Oh yes, there is,
around that thing.
And a lot of regulations on it. I mean, I was not aware that you actually have to burn everything here, but to change the rules and actually to say when it's coming from certain countries is actually pretty safe. Yeah. But because airlines are coming in from a lot of places, you have some health regulations. So a lot of it is thrown away and basically not used, but it could be recircled. But also like all the plastic you're using on board, how can we avoid this? How can we repackage? How can we do things? And are people really willing to pay for flying on a more sustainable flight. So far, we found out that people are not willing to pay for it. They talk a lot about it, but they're not really willing to pay for it. So I think this is something that you need to work with hand in hand with the passengers who are flying, but also on the ones who are actually producing the things you're using on board. And I know we have a whole department now just looking at this, and it was quite fun to work with them on ideas that we had up here. We had actually the first biofuel flight out of Stockholm. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, nobody wanted us to talk about it because where does the biofuel come from? Yeah. But I think it's important that I could work for a company who actually allowed us to do some of these things. It's not all the airlines where you, as a Nordic sales manager, are allowed to do all of this.
No, that's just let's round it up a little bit about that. As you said, you're Nordic, responsible for sales, but you have been introducing Sønderhaven cheese on the flights, kokkeriet, 4 dishes on kokkeriet, the Singapore sling ice cream from Skarø, and various other stuff. I remember some chocolate as well coming in. So that is not traditionally for a salesperson. No. So let's round it a little bit up and saying that other than sales, which is of course is an important metric of the job, what was it actually that made you feel that Singapore Airlines was the right place since you were there for 30 years?
Well, basically, it's a company who takes extremely good care of its staff. It's a company with very strong roots in the Chinese mentality. So you're part of the family. So I like that feeling. It was more or less the same also when you're working for an Arabic carrier. It's a little bit of the same thing. But the thing is that I was doing marketing and I was doing PR because we were a small station. So basically, you become a jack of all trades. And marketing and PR goes hand in hand. And as a small carrier, how can you differentiate yourself from the big ones who are financed by maybe governments and so forth? We are a very commercial airline, so we need to set ourselves apart. And by doing various things that actually made sense, to me at least, and maybe also to our passengers, it was very easy to look at new ways of doing marketing and PR. To fly from point A to point B, you can do that in a lot of ways. But Singapore Airlines have not been one of the cheapest airlines, and we want to give value for money, and we also want to give insights, and we want to do something very, very special for our flight. So this was basically in our DNA, and it was easy to get the permissions to do so. And then it was just like, all right, now we have this one we would like to do. And the ambition was to have more products out of southern part of Sweden. But I was not really aware of all the restrictions about supplying, getting it over, and at least getting the approval to actually uplift it. There are a lot of rules and a lot of restrictions whenever you're dealing with catering. So something we had to let go and have to wait. And maybe now, when things open up again, there will be a lot of new projects for my successors to do. We tried to do whatever we could to put a mark or put a fingerprint on Singapore Airlines.
Okay, great stuff, Allan. I think that's all we have time for in this little session.
30 years in
30 years in 20 minutes. It goes fast. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure we haven't heard the last of you in the airline industry in Copenhagen or Denmark and the Nordics. I'm pretty sure that your name will pop up time and time over again.
I hope so, that one can make a difference.
That's definitely. Allan, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Henrik. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
That was all from today's show, where Allan Hoffery talked to us on his 30 years working in the aviation industry and working at Singapore Airlines. Remember to subscribe so you will get notified when the next show is live. Thank you for listening to the Travel Plus Loyalty podcast. I wish you a great day wherever you are.